Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here. I'm just sitting here drinking my morning coffee. You guys know what time it is. Time to talk about current events in the online fitness community. And if you guys like these type of videos, please remember to click like down below. It would be greatly appreciated. And I was waking up just a little bit ago, and I stumbled across a video on Mark Bell's channel just the other day where he was interviewing Mike Dolce, who I happen to enjoy his work. I happen to hold a favorable view of Mike. And as you guys know, most of the people in this industry, I don't like them. Mike happens to be one of the good guys in the industry. I happen to like what he does in general, hold a favorable view of him. And they were chatting about how much muscle is too much. And we're talking about for athletes. I thought that was an interesting topic. Because I think it falls in that category where I will usually tell people of almost irrespective, other than a tiny handful of sports, muscle and strength itself is not going to be a disadvantage. How you train to get it and maybe what substances you put in your body to get it can be the issue. In other words, you don't necessarily lose conditioning for the majority of sports just because you put on another 10 pounds of muscle. That's what we're talking about here, or 15 pounds of muscle mass. Now, when people are talking about putting on 30 pounds, 40 pounds, who are already in shape, you're talking about using very copious amounts of anabolics to do that. That creates its own potential set of problems. But if we're talking about from training, like gaining 15 pounds of muscle from training, it's generally not going to make you a worse athlete in any way if everything is balanced. And it's one of these topics that they came up with. And I think Mike hit the nail on the head. And it's interesting that he's chatting with Mark Bell because Mark originally comes out of the whole conjugate method, which has then been extrapolated these days for every sport on earth. In other words, a lot of your very top strength and conditioning coaches use their same concepts and ideas and templates for MMA fighters, for NFL players, baseball players, basketball players, boxers. It's the same template that people like Alex Viada use who train hybrid athletes. It's the same concept. So it's interesting that these two are talking about that. And what Mike said, it's an issue of people not knowing how to periodize their training. The issue you run into when you see a lot of these athletes who they do spend this time gaining muscle and they run out of gas, it's very much a case of maybe they're going in and spending some time trying to train and bulk up and gain muscle as quickly as they can. Their other training takes a sideline for it, and then they have to get back into shape. Or they have too many coaches who aren't communicating with each other, who are like a counselor, and you've got 3 or 4 different coaches coaching different things for the same elite level athlete, and they're not communicating with each other. And that's a recipe for disaster. I always think that that's interesting because what we're dealing with is a case of people trying to do too many things in too many different phases and not being ready for their specific sport. And I think a lot of what he said too is not having the right substrates, meaning maybe they've gained muscle, they've gained strength, they've gained these other endeavors, but their conditioning itself, and conditioning in this case meaning fuel substrate, stamina, different things that they need to make it through the specifics of their sport. And that's a very specific thing to the sport that you're doing. Very specific to the sport that you're doing. And I think a lot of it comes down to proper periodized training, recovery, things like that. I mean, perfect example, they showed highlights of some of these guys who were doing like rack deadlifts, really grindy rack deadlifts with a weight they're really not capable of lifting. And right there, everyone who knows what I follow here is going to laugh at that, because if you have someone who needs very, very large amounts of workload throughout the week because they need to be good at multiple things, that your recovery is done. Like, you can't do stuff like that. And I'm not saying don't do max work, because I think you need to be doing max work. I think serious athletes who need to be brutally strong, you better be doing max effort work. That's not really max effort work. We're back over to the point of doing silly stuff without putting it in the context of recovery, right? They're not thinking in terms of recovery. I don't have my guys deadlift like that. I don't deadlift like that very often. Reason for that. It's just not always well thought out training, not every single time. But I think that people need to keep that in mind, that let's step back and look at what they're talking about and then assess for maybe non-elite athletes and people who just want to be well-rounded. Well, the same concepts can apply. Uh, I mean, in my case, I work with a number of different clients. I think people have this misconception when I'm coaching and they think that I'm a powerlifting coach. I don't have a single competitive powerlifter on my roster. I do not have a single client who competes in powerlifting. It's my sport that I enjoy. That doesn't mean that's what I'm coaching. I'm not a meet prep coach. In fact, if you come to me and say, hey, I need you to prep me for a meet and I want you to go to comp with me, I'm going to refer you out to another coach. I don't offer that service. Again, people weren't aware of that. That's not what I do. I'll outsource you. I know other people I can send you to who specialize in that sort of thing. No, I do strength coaching. But I have clients who compete in different sports. Some of them need to be well-rounded. And I'm going to get into the specifics of what they're in, but I have people who are in different endeavors or who need this stuff for their actual jobs. Right? They need this stuff for their actual careers and jobs. So I think in these terms, and I think what people need to understand is that when we're talking about being well-rounded, that does mean we're generally trying to maximize the amount of muscle we have, right? We're maximizing the amount of muscle we have. And these things need to be incorporated correctly. It's kind of like the topic came up the other day when I talked about the running thing. And people are like, why don't you run? I'm like, running doesn't work into my conditioning. It doesn't work into my overall program. The amount of effort that I would need and the money and the time I would need to spend to run, because I weigh 220 and I don't have any place close by where I could run that's not on pavement. Okay, it's not like I can just go take a 3-minute walk down the street and find a place to run. It's not going to be hard on my joints, and running is not even beneficial for any of what I do. I have other conditioning work, but we have to incorporate these things as part of our larger periodization. You don't do random stuff. When you're trying to become a well-balanced athlete, you don't do silly random stuff and just decide, I'm just going to do this activity. That's not how a serious athlete thinks. These things need to be programmed and incorporated. And all these things need to be looked at in terms of limits. And that's the issue a lot of these athletes do run into when they have multiple coaches who are not communicating. One guy's doing their conditioning work and another guy's doing their power training and another guy's doing their technique training, and they're not talking to each other. These things have to be periodized together, especially if you're doing them all in the same phases. And that's the interesting thing when you take like the conjugate type method, which is what Mark's background is in, Mark Bell there, which is what I use, what Alex Viada, all these other people, Joe DeFranco, all these people are using. And it's what I've gone back over to because it works to where we have different days and workouts that are built around different performance elements, right? I have a maximum effort lower body day. I have a maximum effort upper body day. I have a dynamic effort lower day, dynamic effort upper day. These are all woven into the same programming. They're periodized into a concurrent periodization. Then I have separate conditioning work. But we work the different things in. I mean, where do I work in plyometrics? I work in plyometrics onto my speed days because that's where they belong. Do I need to train maximum explosiveness for my legs more than once a week? Probably not. That was the other thing, too, that he brought up was, well, I don't always think in a one-week schedule. Well, one-week schedules are fine because especially if you're going to coach yourself and coach clients, most of the templates work around it. They're not actually problematic. It's that do you pick the appropriate volumes based upon the fact if you know you're going to be doing each performance element once a week, you better have your volumes appropriate. And if people say, well, Jason, like you said, training a muscle once a week isn't ideal. Well, it's not because you're training all the muscles more than once a week. Train each performance element is fine once a week. Each major performance element can be trained once a week just fine. If your training volumes are appropriate for that frequency, you adjust the amount of volume you do. In other words, if you were going to train a performance element once every 10 days or once every 5 days instead of once every 7, your volume and the amount of it that you do on that day would be adjusted. Okay? That's part of your proper periodization. How do you stagger these things so that each one doesn't interfere with the next one? For example, I don't do necessarily really serious conditioning work, strength conditioning, the day before I do a max effort squat. Yeah, I keep that as a lighter active recovery day. So if I'm doing max effort squatting on Monday, I don't do farmer's carries on Sunday. I'll do them on Saturday. I'll do them 48 hours out. I'll do a bunch of them on a Saturday. That's not a problem. But you can do it that way. You can do that GPP work on the same day later if your hands can take it, depending on how you deadlift it. You have to look at your conditioning of how is it balanced with your other stuff. And the amount of conditioning that you do is going to be limited with all of that, but you have to balance it all together. You do have to balance it all together. You've got to balance your max strength, your speed strength, your additional training volume for hypertrophy. But at the end of the day, I think people need to remember is that if you're trying to gain muscle and you're trying to gain functional hypertrophy, all of these elements weave together. Everything that you do should have a hypertrophic component, right? And if everything that you're doing has a hypertrophic and a body composition component other than true endurance work, you're going to get more jacked anyways. You're going to get more jacked as a general rule. If everything that you do or a lot of what you do has a conditioning component, your conditioning is going to improve. It's a matter of making sure that your different days feed into each other correctly. And if more people do that, what you're going to do is you're going to find is that it is possible to be really big, really strong, really explosive, be conditioned, all of this stuff concurrently. And so it's kind of what they're talking about for the more advanced athletes and these elite athletes, and the problem of the poor periodization maybe when the coaches aren't communicating. This is stuff that we can bring back in and think about for the more generalized person who's trying to be a reasonably well-rounded athlete who maybe isn't an ultra-serious competitor. The same concepts can apply to all of you. It can apply to all of you. You've got to balance these different performance elements with their training volumes and recovery throughout the week if you want to train everything concurrently. All right, guys, so that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.